Welcome to the ANEW Insight podcast, empowering and inspiring your journey to optimal health. Hosted by Dr. Supatra Tovar, clinical psychologist, registered dietitian, fitness expert, and author of Deprogram Diet Culture. Rethink your relationship with food, heal your mind, and live a diet-free life. I follow my guests' journey to optimal health, providing you with the keys to unlock your own wellness path. Tune in and evolve with us. Welcome to the ANEW Insight podcast. I am Dr. Supatra Tovar, and I am very excited to have award-winning dietitian and chef and former classmate
Yeah,
and former
right.
internship mate, Sherene Chou, with us today. Sherene, welcome.
Thank you, Supatra. Really excited to be here today.
Yay. I have been following Sherene forever. She's just been doing some really amazing work out in the field ever since we graduated and finished our
Mhm.
internships. And so this is my chance to really pick her brain and get to know the work that she's doing out there a
Mm.
little bit better. So before I delve into the questions, I am going to read a little bit about Sherene and then we'll get into it. Sherene Chou is an award winning dietitian and chef dedicated to fostering a more equitable and sustainable food system through plant based nutrition, culinary medicine, and health equity. She co founded Food and Planet, an initiative aimed at empowering healthcare professionals to transform the food system. Shireen has collaborated with national brands and institutions to develop innovative programs that enhance accessible and culturally inclusive nutrition education. She has served as chair for the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics Vegetarian Nutrition Practice Group and as a nutrition advisor for the Plant Based Foods Association. Her work has been featured in prominent publications such as the New York
Ooh,
Times, Today's Dietitian, and British Vogue. Shireen, welcome.
thank you so much. I'm excited to be here and talk to you today.
I'm so excited to pick your brain. I want to go back into your inspiration, your personal journey into plant based nutrition, and what
Mhm.
inspired you to focus on sustainable food systems.
Yeah, so it's something that I've been really interested in. I think it evolved a lot over time. So I was born and raised vegetarian, and that was based on health preferences from my family. My whole family's vegetarian. So born and raised vegetarian, my siblings. And then also being Taoist and religious traditions, so following that, and then just combining the two pieces, and then over time, about over 10 years, 10 or 12 years ago, shifting to a 100% plant-based diet, so a vegan diet. And my big change for that was, and it might not seem like a big jump to people from vegetarian to vegan, but I think for a lot of vegetarians, maybe they wouldn't think about a vegan diet for those nuances. But anyways, I really transitioned to a vegan diet because the more I learned about the politics of our food and our whole food system was kind of one of the things that helped me shift my diet in that direction. And also, I wasn't having dairy foods to begin with because most people who are non-white are allergic to dairy and can't digest it. So that was one piece. And then I was really having eggs and then just kind of finding alternatives for that. And so I'm really happy, had two really healthy vegan pregnancies and happy to share more. Yeah, so that's kind of been my journey just from a personal to a professional and kind of larger perspective of just my own education and my own preferences.
Yes, and I can relate. I think delving into our food system has really just been eye-opening for me and has along with the health benefits of being plant-based, there's so many, and we're going to go into those and talk
Mhm.
about them. The politics of the food systems, I think, are worthy of a discussion. And I think a lot of people don't really have as much of a background or information about that because it's kept so quiet. If you could give our listeners a picture of what you learned, as much as you feel comfortable to, what did you learn and how did that make you transition to fully plant based?
I think I mean, I was already not having meat just based on my religious and just personal background. But I think fully plant-based, just learning about food subsidies, the dairy industry, and kind of learning more about how all those pieces influence policy, influence kind of recommendations in a lot of ways. I think it's a very complex topic. And I think that what I want to before I get into more is that I really want to share that food shaming is not something I support at all. I think that people are very much welcome to have their food choices. I think it's really important. And also, another big thing that I strongly advocate for is access to food and health equity. And I think that, just because that is my preference. And of course, I think from a health professional standpoint, so much evidence points to certain things, but without access and affordability, that's just not realistic for a lot of people in terms of like, let me just get all fresh fruits and vegetables. Let me just go for all organic. Let me just go for all local things. I think a lot of the conversations we're having now in politics with a lot of different people in office and different people in decision making positions are pushing for a certain perspective. And I think that there's nothing inherently wrong with, of course, having more fruits and vegetables because we all know that that creates healthier, bodies, healthier food systems. But is it realistic? I think that just having that nuanced conversation and then not having the shame around that piece.
Right. So what was it for you that tipped you exactly, like tipped you toward 100% plant-based? What was it that you learned?
I think learning about the dairy industry and then speaking more to different people, learning more from different lectures and the politics of, like, for example, right now, we're in the next round of the dietary guidelines. The dietary guidelines are kind of defined once every 5 years. And that's on a national level. And I think as dietitians, we all know that that's our guiding principle for defining, you know, how we want to educate people on how to eat. That also defines different meal programs out there. So, school lunches, anything government funded are following dietary guideline patterns. And then also, when we're talking about healthy food patterns, we follow the dietary guidelines. So, recently, I think within the last 2 weeks, they had just people going. So, part of the process of defining the guidelines, you have public comments, but these public commenters are not random. I looked at the full list, and half the people were from the meat industry and the other half were advocating for plant-based diets. So it's just there's this big divide, and they might not have a direct influence on the overall guidelines because that ultimately is not shaped from the committee. They could give recommendations based on the current research, but it's the whole process is not always transparent. And I think that
Mhm.
just learning I just encourage any listener to learn a little bit more about the politics behind foods, but I don't know if that's too nuanced to ask people to
Well,
do.
maybe you can point people toward, sites where they can get,
Yeah, I
the
mean,
accurate information.
Mary Nestle has a site called Food Politics. I mean, I think that's a great blog. Is it perfect? No, but I do think that she is an incredibly knowledgeable professor from NYU, kind of one of the people that have shaped a lot of food politics and public health views. And so I think she has a lot of amazing knowledge and she issues a blog every single day, on
Sure.
different topics focused on food politics and has written several books on it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
she's a wealth of information. I've
exactly.
read her books, and I think for anyone who needs a background in just the history of food politics,
Hmm.
she is the woman to go to. Also, Melinda Hemmelgarn, who's the
Hmm.
Food Sleuth radio
Hmm.
personality. She also
Hmm.
has a lot of great information, and I think
Hmm.
the more that people can educate themselves, then they can make decisions that are not only good for their health, but also for, their wallets, for the planet, I think the more informed we are, the better we are as consumers.
Mm.
And how do you define a whole food plant-based diet? Does that differ from a vegan diet? I think there's a lot of confusion out there about
Yeah. I think
that
there are a
idea.
lot of different diets out there, and I don't particularly, I guess, push for one diet or the other. It's really how do you add more plants to your plate? How do you add more fiber to your day? I feel like that is the easiest way to process the information and also makes it not intimidating when I'm talking to people or making recommendations. So if we're able to advocate for just more plants in general, more access to plants, more plants on people's plates, that's the best way. And going back to your question about defining a whole food plant-based diet, a lot of people use that term very specifically. So whole food plant-based as it is a vegan diet, but it's also excluding a lot of different vegan foods that might be processed. And for me, I do not shy away from certain like veg meats, vegan meats, and the even the term processed is very complex,
Mhm.
very triggering for different people depending on who you're talking to. Is there a place for processed foods in your diet? Yes. I don't think that eating a 100% whole food plant-based diet is a bad thing, but I also don't think that it's realistic for a lot of people.
I think that that's really powerful. And yes, I think that it can come across as exclusionary,
Exactly.
primarily for health reasons. That's why it's, touted this way. But I
Mhm.
think it can become elitist and it
Mhm.
can be hard to sustain,
Exactly.
especially if you're out going to restaurants where, they may not have completely 100% whole food plant-based options, having some flexibility around it, but really just trying to promote the need for us to have more plants and for to have more fiber. So, specifically talk about fiber because I think people tend to think, if you look out in the media today, it's like all they're getting is you need more protein, you need more protein,
Exactly.
more protein. And I don't think we've been protein deficient for a very, very, very long,
Mhm.
and that certainly is kind of market driven, that push.
Yeah.
But we don't hear as much about fiber. And so just talk a little bit more about the importance of fiber and why that might not be as popular in the media today.
I mean, I think protein is a sexy topic. Um, Protein, when you think about that, I feel like from a marketing perspective, it's very visual. You can think about protein relating to strength or protein relating to, the sports or athleticism of people. You're not And protein, we are not protein deficient. If we're looking at the dietary guidelines and the research and the evidence, most Americans consume double the amount that is needed. And so that's not something we're deficient of. I think why fiber is not talked about as often is that it's not a really sexy topic. Fiber is associated with pooping, bowel movements being regular. So you know, is that gonna be on a billboard? I don't think so. So it's not
How do we
really
make
sexy.
pooping
Yeah.
sexy
And
again?
I think as dietitians, or health professionals, we talk about it so regularly. It's so normal to us. But I was just at this comedy health show last week, and I think it made a lot of people in the audience feel uncomfortable as a couple of doctors and then a couple of comedians who put on this health comedy show to encourage people to learn more about their gut health and, getting their checkups. And I didn't think that people would be uncomfortable, but I'm around, I'm not I talk about it so common and normal, it's normal conversation, but I could see people visibly uncomfortable. And so imagining, something like that on a commercial or a billboard, even though it needs to be talked about, but it's just maybe not
True.
that marketable. And
Yeah,
then
yeah, I think it's just because it's only associated with pooping,
yeah.
which is definitely not sexy, but fiber is also so important for so many other processes. So maybe you can
Exactly.
help people understand why it's so important that we get sufficient fiber in our day.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is great for your overall. I mean, first of all, it's something that we need, and it helps you, of course, be regular, but it also helps you with your gut health as well. And when we're talking about fiber, I think a lot of people think about like, okay, like probiotics, and then at one point there was a lot of conversation around prebiotics as well.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know if you've talked about prebiotics before already,
No.
but, those are the things that kind of feed into the probiotics, and so a lot of those foods are from fiber foods. One of them is Jerusalem artichoke. I mean, I'm just thinking back to, like, our school days, and I don't think someone even did a project on that. But anyway, so it's a really important piece of what we're doing. Not just that, but there's a lot of micronutrients that we're getting and vitamins from the foods that have fiber. So these are foods that are leafy, not just leafy greens, but fruits and vegetables,
Very
just
good.
fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, have a lot of amazing fiber. And so all of these things are part of what we recommend when we're talking about quote unquote balanced diet, or even having a plant forward or a plant-based diet.
Yes, absolutely, and, we have on the podcast talked about the gut microbiome, and
Mhm,
it changes significantly with the more fiber and the more plants that you add to your diet,
mhm.
and they've done a lot of different studies of the gut microbiome between, somebody who's following the standard American diet and
Yeah.
someone who has a lot more plants in their diet.
Mhm.
And the gut microbiome changes
Yeah.
with the diet composition, and that has proven to be so beneficial for our health in preventing disease
Mhm.
and enhancing cognitive function and reducing anxiety and depression. So
Mhm.
I really do hope that we can make fiber sexy in
Yeah.
some way if we maybe even open up and expand its benefits beyond just pooping, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we all talk about it so much in so many different ways, but I think fiber, when you think about it, that's kind of the direct direct relation to it.
Exactly.
Just talking more about plants a little bit and fiber, I think, and how it ties into sustainability is the having a really wide range of fruits and vegetables can help change your microbiome, like you were saying, and then also different foods also feed off of that. Most of what where most people are consuming are just from three different foods, like wheat, corn, and hold on, I'm like wheat corn, and is it rice? But anyways, it's not, and that also kind of damages our whole food system because of the lack of diversity and biodiversity. And so if we're focusing on just these very few crops that are kind of shaping our overall diets, it not only impacts us from to a micro level, like our own individual bodies and our microbiome, but it also impacts on a macro level, kind of the food system and the land, and not being able to regenerate in that sense.
Yes, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about how eating more plants contributes to sustainability. And I do believe it's wheat, corn, soy,
Yes.
primarily for agriculture,
Yes.
for the feeding of animals, as opposed to the feeding of us, and how
Mhm.
much acreage goes towards especially cattle production,
Yes.
but really all animal food production takes up so much land for agriculture that could go to feeding more people. So go into that a little bit more. How does a plant-based or plant-forward diet help with sustainability and also with global warming?
Yeah, I mean, it's very, let's see, how do I wanna talk about it? It's very complex, but I think it's easy to talk about it in a few simple points. Of course, eating more plants helps with diversifying what we're growing. It also
Mhm.
helps, like I mentioned, diversifying that gut connection as well. What we're currently doing now is very much impacting our overall land, our resources. Just to quote this paper, which I can put in the notes later, 80% of the world's deforestation is related to food systems, and it is the leading cause of land use and biodiversity loss. And that's what I was talking about in terms of biodiversity loss and how important it is to diversify our diets. Um, all that to say, though, is that just the current system we're operating in is not sustainable because and I feel like it's a very challenging, obviously challenging topic to solve because there are so many actors that and different inputs. Of course, there's the policy piece, there's the consumer piece, there's people who are eating every day. There's also the commercial piece of people who are making the foods and making money off of different foods. And then what's accessible and what's realistic. And so without going back to why I even wanted to go into sustainability is thinking about the policy piece because without changing policy, it's very hard to change downstream a lot of different things. Of course,
Mhm.
where, I'm always encouraging and advocating people where they can to kind of choose more sustainable products or look into brands or companies to see how they're run. If you do have that choice, that's to choose for different foods and the different labels. I think that in terms of sustainability looks at so much more than just what we typically think about sustainability in terms of the planetary or the land piece. But something at Food and Planet, which is the nonprofit I co-founded with three other dietitians, we developed kind of our theory of change is focused on the four different dimensions of sustainable diets. We call that our 4D framework. And not only are we thinking about planetary health, which is a lot of things we're talking about now, but also nutrition from a dietitian perspective or health professional perspective, but the sociocultural aspects as well as the economic aspects. So, looking at all different four dimensions of sustainable diets is how we can transition to more sustainable food system. There isn't like a linear answer or linear way to doing this, but as health professionals, when we're building out education, think about ways that we can engage in these different pieces when we're talking to patients or when we're talking to government policy, changing government policies, or any places that we're working in, kind of how we can lock in into these pieces to make slow shifts.
Yeah. I love that, and I think that, people think that it can be kind of an all or nothing thing, and it doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily have to be. I heard some statistics about if you just did 1 day a week, like meatless Mondays,
Mhm. Mhm.
how much of a difference that would make, not just for your health, but for the health of the planet. How many emissions would actually be reduced? Just what kind of a difference it would make economically and globally. And that to me was really profound. I think that, people think, oh, I can't just go 100% vegan. And of course, that's very difficult for a lot of people. And it's also
Exactly.
kind of not not accessible to so many people,
Mhm.
but so many people can do 1 day a week. What other tips do you have for people to, maybe transition more to plant-forward eating?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said is right. That's the point, is that it does not have to be all or nothing. I think that people when it's all or nothing, a lot of people are trying to catch you on failing, and then that doesn't help or encourage. It's not it then becomes about something else versus your own health, and I think that if you're able to let go of all or nothing, but think about it as something as simple as just 1 meal a day or 1 meal out of the whole week, and then seeing you might even have naturally some plant-based or plant-forward meals that you're already having that you might not know about, or even swapping out different proteins that you're thinking about, diversifying the proteins that you're consuming. So those are just some simple ways and strategies. And when you brought up Meatless Monday, that whole campaign, they actually just updated their website, I think last month, and launched it. And so they have all these different amazing resources on different strategies and even recipes on there for people to try. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing, and definitely um, don't feel like it's I feel like try to reimagine the meals that you're used to having or even try something different and something new because if you're using something that you usually have and then you just say, "Okay, well, I'm just gonna remove the meat out of it," and then you're gonna say, "Okay, well, that wasn't fulfilling," because of course it won't be because that's not something you're used to having in that way. You're used to having it be created in a different way. So reimagining different meals or look at through different recipes that really inspire you and that look delicious to you. I think focus on something that looks delicious to you is
Mm.
something a great way to try something new.
Yes, and that's why I think there is such a benefit in those plant-based meats because
Mhm.
they do allow for you to experience a plant-based meal without necessarily
Mhm.
sacrificing the texture and the
Yeah.
flavors that you were so used to, and that can certainly be a helpful transition. And I know a lot of people are, thumbing their nose up, but as far as the health benefits, even if it is a processed food,
Mhm.
you're gonna have more health benefits from that plant-based meat than you would have, from animal products. So I think it's valuable to experiment and then to just kind of dip your toe in and to see how you feel, especially after a
Mhm.
plant-based meal versus a standard American diet meal. And then I think you can let your body help you decide because oftentimes your body's like, oh, look at all this fiber. I feel amazing. My mental health is better. My pooping is better, the
Yeah,
whole thing. And
which
so
contributes to your overall mental health.
absolutely. Well, we're out of time for this half of this podcast, and I didn't even get to so many of my questions, so I'm just gonna keep on picking your brain. But hang tight, Shereen, and we're gonna
Okay.
be back for the second half of this incredible podcast with award-winning dietitian and chef Sherene Chou. Please join us for the second half, and thank you so much for joining us for this half.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into the ANEW Insight podcast. Please remember the contents shared on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. You can find us anywhere podcasts are streaming, on YouTube at my.anew.insight and at anew-insight.com under the ANEW Insight podcast tab. And follow us on our socials at my.anew.insight on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads for more updates. Tune in next time and evolve with us.